Jesus goes to a lot of dinners. In the Gospel of Luke, we are told that at least 8 times about Jesus having a bite to eat, plus one parable that centers on a dinner party, and one time that Jesus feeds people. That's 10 conversations about eating together. For comparison, there's only 7 miracles mentioned in the Gospel of John. Clearly, Luke wanted readers to notice about how Jesus approached the dinner table. What do we learn from these passages about Jesus' eating habits? It's not the menu. Most of these passages, ours included, say nothing about what was on the table. Occasionally, we get some hints of the first century diet. Clearly, it included bread, fish, and wine, also apparently eggs, figs, and mint. Put all that together and you get a decent meal, but not much of a meal plan. There's a reason that we're not all cooking out of the Barefoot Rabbi cookbook. Luke also doesn't care about the furniture, the decor, or the utensils at these meals. Rather, the gospel is focused on who's present for dinner and how they act. This reflects the culture of the day. In first century Palestine, the correct practice of hospitality was a serious business. Who was invited and how they interacted raised major religious and ethical questions. The Gospel of Luke keeps bringing up Jesus' approach to meals to show us Jesus' perspective on these questions. So I'd like to spend some time on the hospitality norms of the era before looking at Jesus' commentary on them in this passage. You may know that Judaism traditionally has a set of dietary laws, including rules about what animals can be eaten, how meat should be prepared, and how to keep meat and dairy separate. In the first century, the Pharisees were a Jewish group who tried to follow these laws very rigorously. For the Pharisees, following the food laws was a way to maintain the distinctiveness of their people, even when they were conquered and living under the rule of the Roman Empire. Anyone who has had a grandmother who insisted on the importance of eating traditional foods may be able to relate here. Unfortunately, in their quest for purity, the Pharisees went beyond simply prescribing certain foods and argued for restrictions on who should be invited and present at such meals. Again, the goal was to preserve the distinctiveness of their people, but in practice, this meant excluding and diminishing certain people who were seen as impure, such as Gentiles, women, and outcasts. We see this dynamic earlier in Luke's gospel. In Luke chapter 5, Jesus meets a man called Levi, who was a tax collector for the Romans. In other words, he's a collaborator with the enemy. Levi invites Jesus for dinner at his house with some of his work colleagues, fellow tax collectors, and the Pharisees lose it. They ask Jesus, "Why are you eating and drinking with sinners?" The implication is that no godly man would hang out with such people. It's at this point that Jesus and his disciples start to get a reputation, not a good one. Finally, we should know that meals in the first century had an expectation of reciprocity. If you had someone over for dinner, you expected them later to have you over for a similarly nice dinner to balance your accounts. And then, of course, you'd have them over again, and they'd have you over again, and so on. What this meant in practice is that people who had the resources to host elaborate dinners usually only invited guests who were equally well off. The poor couldn't reciprocate in this way, so they didn't get invited to the best dinner parties. If they shared meals with anyone, it would be with other people of their class. Thus, these meals tended to reflect and reinforce the class distinctions of the time. Rich hung out with rich, and the poor with the poor. In our passages today, Jesus comments on and challenges these practices. Our reading begins by setting the scene. As usual, Jesus is having dinner. It's not just any meal, though. It's during the Sabbath, the Jewish day of rest, which begins Friday evening and ends Saturday afternoon. Thus, the timing of this meal is charged with religious significance. And this is reinforced by the guests. There's religion scholars and Pharisees, including one of the top Pharisees. In Anglican terms, it's like having a nice Sunday dinner after church with not only the priests, but a bishop coming along. And also Jesus, who doesn't have an equivalent in the Anglican church, but we might compare to a popular preacher who does street ministry and is known for being a bit controversial. Jesus tries to get the conversation going by pointing out a man with swollen joints and asking if it's allowed to heal on the Sabbath. That doesn't elicit much response. So instead, Jesus decides to criticize the behavior of his fellow guests. He passively aggressively advises his folks to stop trying to sit in the place of honor and comes up with the most horrifying reason why you shouldn't. Because the host might embarrass you in front of everyone for being in the wrong place, and then everyone will watch while you slink off to the last available seat. If you're at all concerned about public humiliation, Jesus gives a great reason to avoid pushing for the best seat at the table. But if you have a sense of shame, you're probably also cringing in secondhand embarrassment at Jesus calling out a whole room of people at dinner that he's a guest at. If so, look out, because Jesus is not done. Jesus continues violating etiquette norms by criticizing his host. Right to his face, he tells them to choose different guests. Instead of just friends and family and rich neighbors who can reciprocate, Jesus says to invite people who usually don't get invited, outcasts who can't return the favor. The implication is that the guests at this very dinner, a dinner that is rapidly becoming a train wreck that will be remembered for 2,000 years to come, were mostly of the same class and status. In other words, the nameless host of this meal was following the usual practice of his time. He's just unlucky enough that Jesus chose this occasion to rudely cast aspersions on the norms of his entire culture. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about this anymore. People never angle to sit next to VIPs, and we don't restrict dinner invitations to those who can repay us, right? Well, classrooms, meetings, wedding receptions, professional networking events, movie premieres, charity dinners, there are still many occasions where invitations and seating arrangements matter. And even if such events are rare in your life, even if you're insulated from the social striving and sorting that rules Toronto, these pressures can still be present in a disguised form. C.S. Lewis commented on this in an essay from 80 years ago titled "The Inner Ring." Lewis observes that there are people who disregard an invitation from a duchess, not out of true humility, but because what they really want is to gain entry to some artistic or socialist clique instead. And I think he's right. If you're a musician, what do you care about meeting politicians? It's the opinions of your fellow instrumentalists or choristers you care about. Similarly, from what I've seen of academics, few care about high society. Invitations to give lectures or sit on committees, though, that's where it's at. Of course, academics complain it's so tiring to have to do all that extra work, so tedious to travel or sit through those endless meetings. But what we never say is how much worse it would be to be left out, to never get the invitation because you don't matter. In other words, I can't be too quick to congratulate myself on never wanting to attend the bishop's company dinner. My jealousies are smaller, wishing I had the opportunity to teach that course, or co-author that paper, or be friends with that cool person. Thus, I agree with Lewis. The desire to be part of some inner ring is everywhere. We just disagree on which inner circle is the most desirable. So what do we do with this desire? What do we do with this striving? Look at the end of our passage again. Jesus encourages his host to try inviting different people to their next dinner, and he gives a reason. Our translation today is from the Message, and I think it puts it really well. Jesus says the reason to invite different people is because you'll be and experience a blessing. You'll be a blessing because you're offering a proper gift to your guests, a gift that does not expect to be paid back. And you'll experience a blessing because you'll have the chance of meeting and appreciating people based on criteria other than their station in life. Again, the reason to mix it up in who we associate with and whose company we seek out is so that we can be a blessing by giving a gift and experience a blessing by choosing for different reasons than status or class. After all, Jesus didn't choose his followers, ourselves included, because he expected to be paid back. Indeed, Jesus chose to make his life a blessing in a way that none of us can pay back. What does this mean? Well, we're not required to do anything to reciprocate Jesus' gift. After all, we can't. Rather, Jesus' way and teaching gives us an opportunity to see the world through a different lens, a lens of seeing and being blessings instead of trying to balance the scales and move up in the world. Thanks be to God.